My journey on this matter started during the land claims, where there were people claiming about the forced removals and things. I met one girl coming from the University of Witwatersrand. She was doing her Bachelor of Honours degree, doing a dissertation about the history of Roodepoort West and Dobsonville. It had been my wish all along to have this history documented somewhere, although there are some documents, but it's not accessible to the grassroots. That was my worry. So this girl approached me to assist her to do some research. In fact, it was the late Professor Bonner who introduced this girl to me. So I was more than happy to assist. So I took her around, doing interviews, people testifying about their lives in Roodepoort West and later Dobsonville. So that inspired me, and I became so passionate about this subject because of, we can say, the jealousy of other locations which are documented. You take Alexander, you take Sophiatown, you take Nuclear. There is some literature on those, but as for Roodepoort West, there was very little. So that worried me. Now, this kind of thing is done mostly by universities, not laymen like me. But I was only too happy to help this guy, and he produced that work, the dissertation, and published it, and did some research later on. We worked together until she went to England. So that was the last time we met, but subsequently I tried to form some kind of NPO to do heritage work in Dobsonville and Roodepoort West. So I organized a couple of guys who were part of these land claims endeavours. So we formed this NPO to look specifically on the heritage side of things, where it was inspired as well by the land claims themselves. Because when people who lost their land claims, some of them didn't have an idea where Roodepoort West was. Their parents lived there, not them. They grew up here in Dobsonville. So I felt a need to connect some literature about Roodepoort West and Dobsonville, so that we may know how is it Dobsonville came into being. Yes. So that was basically my inspiration in this journey. And we have achieved some, I'd say, milestones with the Dobsonville Heritage Foundation, where we did some projects in liaison with the University of the Witwatersrand, by way of research, collecting, oral interviews, and going back and forth and identifying the spot where Roodepoort West was, and we even unveiled a plaque at the Roodepoort West Cemetery to commemorate the people who lived there. Yes. So later on, all these organizations come and go. There were certain difficulties within the organization, the internal politics, then we split up. But I felt the need to pursue this thing on my own, do whatever little that can be emanated about this story. Because I had a feeling that, universities have a tendency of coming around, doing the research, like the oral interviews, and store them for years at universities. And ordinary people have got no access to this kind of information. So I felt I'll try around and put whatever information I have and let it be accessible to anyone. Like publishing on Wikipedia, that's a short article to trigger interest in the hope that somebody else maybe down the line may pick this up and move forward with it. So that is basically what inspired me. Yeah, it's been a fulfilling journey. The little bit that I hope in the future to do even more about this. I call it a project. Yeah, to even do more, whatever little information will be there, others will take it from there and move forward with it. Yeah. That was basically my inspiration and my motivation, even now.
It still is.
Yeah, and meeting people like Miss Inolofaten Lekaba here, who inspired me as well. Yeah, and I thank them for that.
Thank you so much, ntate.
Yeah.
It's a pleasure working with you, especially because a part of my ancestry comes from Roodepoort West, and no one in my family wants to talk about it. And so having someone like you who's open to sharing these stories with me, it's healing.
Indeed.
I feel like I know more about myself and my history by speaking to you. So it's so much of a pleasure. You were speaking the land claims, and these were in which year?
The land claims were opened in 1995 for people to apply who were forcibly removed from these locations. It opened only for 5 years. It was from 1995 to 1998. Yeah. But at the time, it was misrepresented because it only talked about people who owned properties, not the tenants. As you know, some of these locations, you had the standholders having tenants, letting tenants in their yards. You'd find 16 tenants in one yard. So the law applied to everybody who was forcibly removed, whether you were a tenant or a landlord. But somehow we missed the application because we were told, no, it's only for the landlords who were allocated stands in Roodepoort West and were allocated stands here in Dobsonville. Yeah.
So when the realization came that even tenants can apply for this, this was when?
After the closure of the period, towards the 2000s. That was the best of the Dobsonville Heritage Foundation, run about that time, because we felt we were hard done by because we were also removed there. So we need to be compensated because at the end of the day, most of the people were tenants there and were paying rent, so they were entitled. Now that needed a massive campaign to have the government reopen this matter to accommodate those who were left out. Yeah. And it was a mammoth task, going to the Land Claims Commission, them telling us to petition the government to reopen because the legislation says 31 December 1998 we close. Yes. So it needs some campaigning and lobbying, and that's how we got involved and formed this Dobsonville Heritage Foundation to precisely look into those issues of that nature. Yes. Yes.
And were you able to get them to reopen the claims?
Yeah, there was some resistance from the government, but through pressure with other groupings, especially rural. There was this rural grouping, most from the northwest, called La Musa.
Okay.
They were more powerful than us because they were national. Yeah, lobbying and pushing for the government. Subsequently, in roundabout later, I can't remember the year, then they said, all right, we'll amend the legislation to accommodate you guys. Yeah, but somehow it has stalled again. Yeah. Other people applied, but in the middle of that process, it stalled again.
So the Roodepoort West residents were not able to make valid claims to the Land Claim Commission.
Some of them were left out in the first. Yeah, but they did in the second.
Okay.
Reopening.
Okay, they applied successfully.
They applied, but as I say, it stalled.
Okay.
The applications went through, then there was a question of processing and compensating. But the government say, no, we're not done with the first.
Okay.
Yeah, because the first ones were kind of, especially the rural communities where you had these big farms and costing a lot of money, and so there was that logistical problem.
Okay.
Now, it was kind of easy with the locations, the urban areas where you are offered, well, we'll offer you money. Take the 60,000 and we can't return your land back. Yeah, because mostly it's now white suburbs, and like in the case of Roodepoort West, where you have a horizon view now. So we can't go back there. Take the money and let's settle this thing. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Some of them were paid.
Okay.
There are those who had applied between 1995 and 1998. Yeah.
Okay. And so once the foundation realized that, okay, there's an issue with land claims, then you shifted your focus to documenting the history of Roodepoort West.
Yes. In fact, that was inspired in greater part by the University of the Witwatersrand, because they were interested to know this land claim and where was Roodepoort West, and do some research on that.
Okay.
Yeah, so these things were interchangeable, so to speak. Yeah, but they played a part in triggering this project. Yeah, because it started with the land claims, the inquiry. There was this woman, Michelle Hay. He teaches, he's a specialist in land claims now at the University of the Witwatersrand.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so after the disbanding or the falling apart of the Dobsonville
Heritage Foundation, yeah,
then you continued with this work on your own.
On my own, yes.
Yeah, and how did you do that without?
Well, I would say I endeavored to do my own research. Thanks to the internet, where you'd inquire go to the internet, try and find out this and say, okay, here's the sequence here. Now, the problem with the internet, this material was here, was there, all over the place, where my wish was to collate all this information so that it makes one
builds a narrative.
Builds one narrative, however imperfect, but it does have a little narrative which can be expanded and researched further. Yeah, so I've been doing that with the help of, people like yourselves, getting information, posting on Wikipedia for everybody to read. And one thing that has disturbed me is that we read a lot about the Afrikaner history, written by the Afrikaners themselves, and the English written about the English, about themselves. Very little, our historians have tended to ignore or neglect this kind of, endeavour to research and document our experiences, especially in the locations. The only pronounced work on the Witwatersrand is about Sophiata. It's about Alexander. To a lesser degree, you have the locations like Duduza in the East Rand, and Musaking and Manseville in the West Rand. Yeah. And to a lesser extent in Pretoria. So, places like so.
No, someone is calling.
Okay.
But it's Frankie.
Yeah, in Pretoria, you find the history of Marabastad, Lady Selborne, Bantule, and the colored community there from Yesterus, but very little. Maybe research has been done about these locations, but the irritating part is this: these things are stored in universities, in these dark vaults in universities, when this kind of information should be out there for our children, our descendants, so that they know who they are, where they come from. Now, this is what inspired me to, all right, academia is academia. Everything that is recorded orally or written goes a long way.
For sure.
Yeah. Goes a long way, more than academia. So that, inspired me to do something about this.
Yeah. And you've been doing like quite a bit.
Indeed, I've tried.
You have.
I've tried. There's no perfection in this world, but the little, with the hope that others will pick up some topics, like the influence of the churches in these locations, where there were, schools were run by mission. That is an entirely massive subject on its own, the impact of churches. And you would find again the social life of these, in terms of music, the evolution of music in the arts, life in general, the difficulties that were experienced on a day-to-day basis, which were, kind of terrible to what we have today. I'll make a mention of the terrible bucket system, where, like I say, you have a landlord having 16 tenants, and those tenants are families using one toilet, and that toilet being a bucket system. And most of the young people today have got no idea what that looks like.
Yeah.
Then you have these bucket systems, you have these, we used to call them the sampunkan. We used to collect this in the evening, the buckets in the evening.
Every evening?
Every evening they used to collect these buckets, driving around with mules and this carrying these buckets on, those kinds of conditions. And especially in the locations, the old locations where you find streets are dirty. You only have one tap at the corner of the street. Women must go carry the water, and young people today are not, the kind of life that was led in Roodepoort West.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even
conceptualize.
Yeah, I can't imagine how that must be.
It was terrible. It was terrible. But the human spirit, we lived and survived in that, much as the administration tried, with their limited resources at the time, because resources were channeled to white people.
And now you lived in this?
Yes, I was born there.
You were born in Roodepoort West?
I was born in Roodepoort West. Although I had to go to the Cape for schooling at my mother's place. But I was born there. I grew up there. As I say, life was good, despite those terrible conditions.
Yeah. And would you say that maybe, I don't know, the feeling of connection to Roodepoort West by actually having lived there is also what's motivating you to keep going with this project, because it's like you're telling your own story.
Indeed, it is nostalgic to say the least, because even today I'm over 70 now, but whenever I go there, remember the good old days when we were still young boys, and you can even hear the smell of the fire, the braziers. They used to call them imbaula. Yeah. And you can even hear the sound of the train coming from, from Krugersdorp. There's a bridge there. You could hear it from the location. It goes kata 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 kata. Then my dad would rush quickly and put on a tie and run to the station. And you hear weekends, the noise of the Sheebeens and the gramophones. Not the radios that we play today. We used to play the gramophone where. You find them in museums nowadays.
I don't even know how they work.
Yeah, you used to wind it until the spring is full, and we put along playing vinyl record with a little dog. His master's voice. Playing there with all the jiving and partying and in little streets. Passages. Slum-like conditions. But We were still boys. It was fine. And hopefully our parents as well.
They made you.
Yeah, it was difficult for them with hindsight,
Yeah.
Because most of the families, you didn't have this electricity. Electricity too was on the poles later, again, in round about the 1920s. It's where you find electricity poles in the streets. But before that, we young people don't appreciate what they went through, Yeah. And you find these migrant people coming over to the towns, staying in these shacks and families there, no privacy, no nothing. But people survived. People survived. Well, much as our town council here tried. They tried in a sense, because even during the removals, the superintendent was the late Dennis Dobson. That's why it was called Dobsonville. He used to be popular with.
It was a superintendent of
the location.
Of the location.
Yeah, because you had the superintendent reporting to the town council.
Okay.
Then the superintendent would have later on in around about 1925 thereabouts, having these advisory boards. Well-respected people in the location, serving on these boards. The educated people, the priests, the teachers, and the bourgeoisie, so to speak,
of the location.
They would work hand in hand with the superintendent.
Okay.
Yeah, but some of these white superintendents, like Dobson, was popular with the community there, because you had these nasty superintendents sometimes, where he doesn't get along well with my people. And he used to encourage things like, sports, general peace in the location. The only bone of contention was the Sheebeens, where we were prohibited from taking alcohol. The black people. Yes. You'd have these raids, by the municipal police, who we call the blackjacks. They used to wear black uniform. They used to raid the locations, going after the Sheebeen queens and all this drinking and they used to be arrested for selling, but most of them sold African beer.
So homemade.
Homemade beer. But even then, it was discouraged as well.
Okay.
That's how they came out with these beer halls now. Around about in the late 30s.
Okay.
There were no more African beer sold in the location. Everybody is going to buy from the beer hall.
And the beer hall was run by?
By the town council, by the municipality.
Wow.
Yeah. Now you have had these migrant workers from Devon on weekends going to drink there. Yeah. So, and the liquor industry was lucrative at the time. The Sheebeen queens used to make a lot of money. Now, the council seeing that there's a lot of profit here.
Let's close them down.
Let's close them down.
And open our own.
Open our own beer hall, where the revenue will be going towards improving the conditions of the location.
And did the conditions improve after that?
Gradually they did, but in Roodepoort West there wasn't much improvement, because generally things stayed the same. The improvements came here in Dobson, where now you had schools, you had the municipal administration, you had now clinics, being done by the revenue from the selling of beer.
Okay.
Yeah, where you had sports fields and stuff like that, The improvement, then we had cinemas, like the weekend-long cinema.
Yes, good.
In the Masenta shops here. And we had a decent shopping complex and decent shopping, places where general.
Yeah. Small shops.
Yeah, but most of that were from the town council revenue, especially from the beer.
Oh, wow.
Selling of beer.
So the beer halls continued after you were removed from Roodepoort West?
Yeah, there was only one in Roodepoort West, the beer hall. It was next to the administrative office. But here in Dobsonville, you had about 5.
Okay. In the township?
In the township. You had around about 5, selling African beer. And there was a lot of revenue there. Although there was beer selling in the houses, but it was prohibited. You had these raids and stuff like that. Yeah. So, and these councils throughout the Witwatersrand were not the same. But ours is reputed to be a good municipality where the administration was good.
Wow.
Compared
Dobsonville Council?
The Roodepoort Town Council, relatively. Because here in Dobsonville, it's where you found everybody now has got his own house.
The previous tenants and
the previous tenants as well. And the people who were working as domestic workers found houses there, here. It was not only Roodepoort West. It was the surrounding Roodepoort Marijsburg municipality, where it was said, all the black people must come into the location. They must not be staying in white quarters, although others did stay. And their employers made sure that some of them, they got them houses here through the town council, like so-called maids. Yeah, they were allocated houses here, where you had your own house now, you have your own toilet. At least it was better than the conditions in Roodepoort West. That would probably be understandable of why there was not so much resistance to move from Roodepoort West as you would have in Sophiatown and Alexander. Because generally things did improve here, although the early days of Dobsonville were just a nightmare themselves. But as time went on, things started to sort themselves out. Because you had creches now, you had
all types of schools.
The churches allocated sites. Generally the grounds, sports grounds and tennis courts, and generally better than Roodepoort.
And also the overcrowding.
The overcrowding as well, because tenancy was prohibited here.
Oh.
Yeah, it was not allowed.
Okay.
You stayed with your family, you have your family from the rural areas, the town council must know who do you have there.
And when are they going back?
And when are they going back? And you're issued with a lodger's permit, that temporary thing. By such a time you must go back and to control the influx, so to speak. To regulate you know, the influx of people. That's why I say, for all intents and purposes, things improved here in Dobsonville. Yeah. Where later on, towards the 70s, you know, this was the best location behind Davidton in the whole Witwatersrand, you know, in terms of cleanliness, well run. Facilities, you know. In fact, we were the first one to have electricity here.
Wow.
Yeah. We were first before places like Juliwe, you know, Juliwe where the center of Soweto. Yeah. So relatively things became good here. Although we came later in around about 66, when the first residents came in around about 55. Yeah. So that whole 10 years, you know, it was kind of...
It wasn't as...
it wasn't so stable as you'd see now with people coming in and segregation, you know. Because what used to happen, you know, in Roodepoort West, the superintendent or the blackjacks would come and say, "All right, here's a letter. You're moving tomorrow. There's a house allocated for you in Dobsonville. Here's the address. So by tomorrow you must be prepared. Take everything, put on a lorry, and you come and dump here. Outside the street, outside your gate, here's your house." Then you start packing in and moving in. And some of the houses didn't have concrete floors. You just went in there with your bed and everything. So the removals were a traumatic period, so to speak. Although it's the tenants that were happy.
Because now they have their own houses.
They will have their own house, their own bosses now. No more nagging landlords. But the landlords, because they were making money, there was that kind of resistance. Where you had the activities of the African National Congress now. And the Pan-Africanist Congress, you know, telling people you're not going there. And you used to get this song, "Uta uta makua ari, ari." There was that kind of resistance, but not much. Although when we moved from Roodepoort, I was down in school in the Cape. I left in January. By the time I came back in June, I came here in Dobsonville. And we were the last ones to move from
your family.
My family, more or less about 100 odd families were the last ones to move there. But hey, the place was spooky, you know, after the removals. Because what used to happen, if they take you out of the house with your tenants, the bulldozer comes in, breaks it down.
Wow.
Now, you know, they were selective as well. Now you have this overgrowth growing in the location, you know, friends are gone, we used to play together, now they are gone, and it's kind of spooky, you know. So we were the last ones to leave there.
Do you feel like sharing this story about the history of Roodepoort West and Dobsonville is somewhat like not reversing the trauma, but addressing it, the trauma of being removed from a place that you used to call home?
Yes. I must say it was traumatic, me being a child, with the elderly people as well, because at the end of the day, there's no ethnicity there. You have a Motswana, you have a Xhosa next to you, you have a Shangaan. You all live together, as opposed to here in Dobsonville, where they said, well, the Tswana speaking and the Sotus one side, the Xhosa, the Nguni one side, like the main road. You know this main road. That was the demarcation. Because if you see the street names as well, mostly on this side is Tswana surnames, and on the other side is now when you removed, your neighbor is a Xhosa, your friends are a Xhosa, but he's taken miles away. Here in Dobson, your new neighbors are strange people. Although you used to come from the same location, but they are strange to you. Yeah. So that was kind of traumatic in a sense. Yeah.
And were you able to, with the Greater Dobsonville Foundation, were you able to reconstitute that sense of community because you came together with people that you grew up with?
Indeed. Like I say, we were kind of family there. Where, in fact, some of the tenants became relatives of landlords. Where you have the landlord with his kids, with his family, and you have these families. They were part and parcel, they were family of that landlord. A thing that carried on until Dobsonville. Because much as we were separated now in Dobsonville, you used to know, we used to stay in so-and-so's yard. Their family, you visit. When there are funerals, you go there. Else, that was the kind of, what can I call it? That was that kind of bond. Where even today, much as the parents have now passed on, but the descendants who still, we used to be family from Roodepoort West. So that thing continued up until the 2000s, more or less.
And then it dissipated.
Yes, obviously, the kids, they've never experienced Roodepoort West. They grew up here, they were born here. Understandably.
Now, how do you feel about this, the kids losing their connection to Roodepoort West versus the limited information and knowledge that's available to them to actually connect with?
It's very distressing because I'll say to know your origins is very important. Even maybe as you study now, you go to the US and settle in the US. But South Africa is home. There is that thing that you can't remove. Now, another reason why maybe there's this apathy of the descendants is because the history is not told. I'll give you one example. When we unveiled the plaque at the cemetery, most of the descendants of the very people who came there, we didn't know there's a cemetery here.
The very people who were removed?
The descendants of the people who were removed. When we invited the whole location for the unveiling of that, it's here, you'll see it. We didn't know if there's even a cemetery here, because the cemetery is the only thing that is left there, which tells, well, there was a black location here. Yeah. And a couple of trees and some landmarks that we know about. Yeah.
But someone like me wouldn't know.
Someone like you wouldn't know. Maybe your dad or your mom would tell you, no, we came from Roodepoort West. We used to say it number so and so. You would know that. But I feel you ought to know. You ought to know, well, our parents came from here. And then maybe our house was in this vicinity here.
Where there's now a mall.
Where there's now a mall or some townhouse building or it's heritage. You know, well, young people must know. Because like I said, the Afrikaner wrote his own story. He makes sure that his historians stay on the story of their experience, which is lacking with us blacks. That is the sad part. Even educated black historians have tended to bypass this. You read any of these works in these universities, when these guys write the PhDs and MAs and theses, and the references that they do refer to are written by whites. It's only there and there where you'll find
black references.
Black historians, which is strange. And we're dealing with what here? We're dealing with the black experience. We know about the struggle, the African National Congress. The Pan-African is called AZAPO. We know about that. But
lived experiences, everything.
The quotidian, as they say, that is very lacking. There's an example of music as well. You know, the history of township music. There's very little documented about it. For instance, the history of choral music in the township. There's so many things, even sports. The Witwatersrand was, I would say, the microcosm of so-called Western influence. Because let's take, for example, the music, where, again, we've said, or we started at the concentration camps, where you had nothing virtually. But gradually, as time, you find work in the mines, you find work in the municipalities, factories crop up. A whole culture changes now, which would entail things like music. Food also, you know, the kind of food eating and things of that nature. And let's say, for instance, the popular music. We've exported our musicians overseas. You know, you take the Masikelas, the Makebas of the 50s, and they are products of township music. A field that is virtually not covered. Because even the Sheebeens were just to let out this hard life, where you must go take a beer because
so much
stress, man, let me
forget.
Indeed, the role played by, for instance, music and sports. You know, so there's a lot to be disseminated here. not necessarily the administrative side, where administrative meaning the administration, town councils and the laws and what, but the ordinary life of people trying to survive and make the best out of what is in here, what is in front of them. And they did. They did. So these stories, little stories, so-called nuances, are not told. Much as the universities try to capture these in oral testimonies, but the disadvantage is that these things are kept in university archives for years and years in these dark vaults at university, which shouldn't be. This kind of information should find a grade 4 pupil taking a cell phone. Just go in there and get the information here. We don't even use libraries these days. It's all here.
It's all on the phone.
Now, with the help of the internet and technology, why are these things difficult?
Why is this knowledge still not accessible?
That's the thing. Why are they not done? Because technology is there to assist us. Even a few lines. Why I'm saying a few lines is that, let me veer off a little.
That's okay.
There's a very important relic of Christianity here, the origins of Christianity. It's called the Rosetta Stone. It's just a stone with some writing on it, about 2 lines or so. The whole Christian world and scholars are focused on that stone, coming from the times of the beginning of Now, it's because there's a writing on that stone, hence the interest. It's not just any other stone. There is a record there, whether oral or written. It is an account. That has been the saddest part in this whole, and even after the so-called freedom, the new dispensation. Black historians have been so preoccupied with the struggle, which is acceptable, but
there's much more.
We didn't live the struggle. We didn't eat the struggle. There was life beyond the struggle. Now, I don't know, it boggles the mind. It boggles the mind, really. But let those who have maybe an interest in topics of this nature, being a layman, being a scholar, being, have the things recorded. Even the songs. You know, there were songs that came from the rural areas, which were introduced to the townships. You know, they always, I remember one song, Baile Banake, Baile Misebeti, Manganisi.
Baile, from the rural areas.
They've gone from the rural areas to the mine. You know, Ena Komponi. You know, coming to the compounds in Johannesburg. So those kinds of...
And they also tell a story.
They tell a story.
Yeah.
You know, it's a lament of a parent, lamenting the children having gone in the faraway lands.
We don't know this compound.
You know, to go work. Well, those kinds of nuances, you get what I'm saying. Yeah. So they must be brought to life, these things.
Yes.
However late and however inadequate. But somehow they must be brought to life.
In whatever capacity.
In whatever capacity. The thing is, we, like I say, we have technology now. We can write now. It's not the old days where you had these missionaries writing about us.
Yeah.
You understand what I'm saying? We can write now. We document the lived experience. Now, it cannot be that a whole community like Dobsonville, which those of us who knew
It's history.
just disappears. Yeah, it's Dobsonville, so what? You know, that kind of attitude. It's not correct. It's not correct. I was reading one about the history of Norgaseg, you know, the township next to Orlando.
Yes.
That goes a long way. There's something either pictorial, oral, or whatever. Like I say, other nations have written about their, especially our former rulers here. They've done taraweki. They've done taraweki. Now, as I'm saying, I've just read a little extract here. Who knows that maybe one day you'll end up in Sweden and come across this information that is stored there.
In the archives.
In the archives there. You never know. You understand, but where is the information in the archives? They're miles away when they should be here. So all this endeavour is to try and, how can I say, whip up the emotion and the interest from the residents of this town, from the residents of this community. Now, the pioneers, the elderly people who have had the history are no longer with us. Now, if we do not capture their accounts, because as I say, that Dobsonville started in 1903 thereabouts. But those people are not there to tell us about their experience. All what you can do is to glean on whatever available information is here, whether pictorial or oral or written. Now, I remember one guy in our organization asking, how dare this American come and write about our history here? It was a white woman, I think he was writing about the very same land dispossession. He came to do a research for a degree from the US. Then I thought, who's here to do that? Who's here to do that? When we ourselves cannot do these kinds of things. So, you know, let's be realistic here. Much as we may be seen as crackpots now. It's a waste of time. What's the point? But I have this belief that somewhere along the line, somebody will take an interest, and hopefully he or she will have something to go on.
Yes. A basis.
He or she will have a base and a direction, because what we're doing is lay arrows, directional arrows. Go look there, go look there, go look there. Indeed. Indeed. That's basically the aim and the mission of this endeavour.
And of your work in it.
Indeed. Indeed. With your invaluable assistance, really.
It's an honor.
Yes, yes, yes. But the Lord will give us strength.
Yes.
We chop away
Yes.
little by little until we come with a narrative. It will not be perfect, but it will be footmarks to follow.
Thank you so much, Dad.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.